The information provided on this podcast is not legal advice and is intended for the sole purpose of providing education and legal information. Laws change over time, and the information provided on this podcast may not be up to date. We make no warranty, express or implied, regarding the information provided by our team or our guests on this podcast. The information should not be construed as legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship with us or any of our guests on the podcast. If you would like to consult with an attorney, please call 1-800-VICTIMS. That's 1-800-842-8467 for attorney referral contact information. This podcast provides a platform for the exchange of ideas and information to help educate crime victims on their rights. Some content will include topics and materials that may involve descriptions of violence or assaults which can be distressing to victims and survivors. It may also impact service providers experiencing vicarious trauma. Welcome in for part 2 of my discussion with Lita Mercado from Waymakers. Are there any other general services that Waymakers offers to the community?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that a part of our role is to also help our victims assert their Marsy's Law rights. So, of course, Marsy's Law, being the California Victims Bill of Rights, it creates and protects many of the victims' rights that have existed and then were put into place since the Bill of Rights Act of 2008. And victims, as you know, don't typically have attorneys supporting them through their process. What they have is, a prosecuting team, if it's going through the criminal justice system, that represents the state, and then their victim advocate. So we take very seriously our responsibility to make sure that every victim knows and understands what their rights are and explore their desire to assert those rights, because some of them do need to be formally asserted. And so one of the programs and services that we offer at Waymakers is we've worked collaboratively with the DA's office to create basically an alert system via the DA's case management process. So we alert the prosecutors as to when we have spoken to victims of crime and what Marsy's Law rights they would like to have asserted. So, for example, a victim advocate can have a conversation with a victim, let them know what their rights are, including the right to, have reasonable notice that a hearing is going to be held, and including the right to deliver a victim's impact statement. And after that communication, what we do is we immediately go into the DA's case management log and alert the prosecuting team that we have had this conversation and that this victim very much wants to know, when every court proceeding is happening, and they very much want to make a victim impact statement. And this is held in their electronic files. So now if a prosecutor is in court and the defense, perhaps surprisingly, starts to share that they'd like to negotiate a plea deal, the prosecutor can go to their laptop right there in the courtroom and pull up the information and see we have spoken to this victim and they want to be heard before any decisions are made. And so the prosecutor is really they're on alert, and they can share with the defense. They can have conversations about a plea deal, but no decisions will be made until the victim is alerted that this is happening and has the opportunity to come in and to be heard. And I think this is, a beautiful reflection of how Marsy's Law is supposed to work, so that everybody knows, the victims are a critical component of this particular criminal, the criminal justice system, and that there needs to be a way to create space for the victims. And we do that on a regular basis, communicating with victims. In some cases, the victims don't want to be involved in the criminal justice system. They don't, if they don't have to. They don't want to go to court. They don't want to have anything to do with this. They just want to know what happened. And we can do that too.
I think it's a wonderful example of what you were referring to earlier, which is that public-private partnership is really what it sounds like, is another example of that.
Exactly.
Let's switch gears here. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the services that you've been able to offer to the general public?
So yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic has really put wrench in this whole system.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out even where to start. There has been, I guess, two things that are important to share, I think. The first is the Orange County. I know every county has their own process and tier depending on what month we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So Orange County has really been in a virtual lockdown for many months. Certainly on March 17th, when the entire state was ordered to stay at home, Waymakers imposed a work from home temporary COVID plan. So
Mm-hmm.
all of our staff, all of our advocates began working from home offices, and we continue to do so still today. What the evolution of the pandemic has brought us to now, we still work from home, but
Mm-hmm.
we are providing in-person services such as court accompaniment. So if someone is going to court and they need support, we will go with them. We're doing crisis response. So we are going out to the field upon the request of law enforcement when something has happened in a community that they need some assistance with.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing those types of in-person services. But anything that we can do to protect our clients from the public health issue, we do. So we're doing, telehealth for counseling services, for example. So anything that we can do to keep everyone from having to go out into public spaces, we are doing. So I think that's one thing, and that has been important in the fact that really in March and April, everything went virtual. And we have started to evolve into providing more and more in-person services upon the request of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other part that I think is critical is Orange County Superior Court closed down completely for a few months. And so now that the courts have reopened, two things. One is they're not really open to the public. People just don't go walking into the court buildings anymore. They're triaging, or rather they're checking to make sure that you have court business already pre-approved before you walk into this public space.
Mm-hmm.
But what this has meant is all of the court proceedings that were postponed in the early days of the pandemic are now on court calendar. But of course, the criminal justice system, even though the courts have closed, the system hasn't stopped, and
Mm-hmm.
crime hasn't stopped. And so the court is faced with this truly, in my opinion, a crisis of how do they calendar all of those proceedings that were postponed from before and deal with those court proceedings that need to be scheduled, that have happened most recently. And so it's really impacted the court. And what, at least in Orange County, what is happening is we are seeing what we're referring to as mandatory settlement conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that was set for preliminary hearing or jury trials are now required to do these settlement hearings where, to be quite frank, the intent is to figure out, can we get rid of this case so it doesn't have to proceed in the courtroom? Can we come to some sort of negotiated agreement to close this case out and minimize the traffic for the court? And while Waymakers, as a organization, citizen of this community, completely understand the obstacles and the complication that the courts are trying to deal with, we also understand what this means for many of our victims is that cases are being encouraged, or at least there's a space to encourage,
Mm-hmm.
plea negotiations in some cases that would not have had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for some victims, this has been good. The long days and weeks and months preparing for trial, being eliminated, and having their case, come to a conclusion can be, in some cases, a relief. And so that, we have seen it go in a positive way, and others, a lot of educating and support with our clients to help them understand, it's not about the validity of the case. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
whether or not anyone believes you. It's simply about logistics. We really need to figure out, what can be avoided to go to trial and what can't. and doing a lot of support around that. And this has also meant, quite frankly, a strain on victims' rights with regards to reasonable notice of proceedings. We have
Mm.
had a lot of times where we're calling a victim, the day a plea deal is trying to be made and saying, hey, it's happening. Do you want to be heard? Because if you do, we can postpone it until tomorrow. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that anyone would describe that as, reasonable notice, but it's it's as it's as reasonable as we have on hand. The courts aren't planning things out weeks and months ahead. They are doing day by day, and so this is the best that we can do, and it's causing a lot of anxiety and strain on these victims' rights. But we are working together with our partners at the DA's office to make sure the victims are notified, to make sure that they do have the opportunity to have their statement heard or read. Um, but it's truly complicated. And another component that has happened that has been a learning curve, I think, for everyone in the criminal justice system is that right now in Orange County we're live streaming the proceedings
Mm-hmm.
so that they can adhere to the law. That we need to have
Mm-hmm.
public hearings, and so they're doing live streaming. And what this has meant for some of the victims, especially sexual assault and human trafficking and domestic violence. These are victims who have legal rights according to the California Penal Code for the protection of privacy. Now their testimony is live streaming, and before a victim could testify in court, and no one's allowed to bring out their camera and record it. But now
Mm.
that it's live streaming, I can record that. I can videotape that on my phone. I mean, there are a wide variety of ways that could be recorded and made public in other spaces, and that's incredibly alarming. And so we have worked and advocated on behalf of many of these victims directly with our DA's office to make sure that they are aware that this is happening. I can see their face. Occasionally the court will read their names out loud, or the defense attorney will read their names out loud, which will then later be stricken from the record, but it was just live streamed. And so
Mm.
how do we avoid outright violations of these types of rights? um, and now everyone is thoughtfully thinking these things through in advance, but these are moments that we just this is historical. We've never had to do this before. And so once we saw that, or once we experienced that, we immediately went to the DA's office and said, no, like we need to make sure that the prosecuting team has all of the information at their disposal to ensure that before a victim goes up to testify, that they state this to the court. They ask the judge to turn the camera slightly away from the victim's face so that her face
Mm-hmm.
isn't on there, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever needs to be done. And so we have begun to do that, and now our DAs do have all the legal information they need to fight for
Mm-hmm.
those rights in advance in a way that we've never even thought needed to be done before.
Yeah, I can potentially see the problem. It certainly wasn't something that was probably well thought out when they went to this live streaming model.
Mm-hmm.
Has so if anyone in our audience wants to contact Waymakers, can you please provide us with the best phone number and maybe website to do so?
Absolutely. So we do have a corporate office, and the telephone number there is area code 949-250-0488. And we have an agency website, so it is waymakersoc.org, and that is Waymakers plural. But I'd like to also share, we have this amazing, I refer to it as a landing page. It's safewithus.org, and it highlights our public awareness campaigns, has a couple of fantastic public awareness videos, and on that site, it specifically talks about our victim assistance services and provides additional information on how to reach out to us, because sometimes the Waymakers website can be overwhelming with all of the other services that we provide, but either website is an excellent way to get more information and to find a way to contact us.
So Lita, I'm curious. Now, you occupy this unique space, as you called it, between being a nonprofit organization but also providing government services. How does that work with confidentiality?
That's such a good question. And it is one that we are acutely aware of on a regular basis. And we fine tune our strategies as we go along. But certainly we lean on Marcy's Law, right? The right to privacy. So, in
Mm-hmm.
general, we practice all of our record keeping and communication in a way that helps to protect the privacy of our victims. But you're right in the sense that in doing government work and confidentiality, how does that fold into each other? And so, as a nonprofit, we do not work for the county, we do not work for the DA's office or for law enforcement, and so we stick to the California Penal Code,
Mm-hmm.
which specifically outlines some protections for communication for sexual assault victims, for human trafficking victims, and for domestic violence victims. And so we work really hard with our teams. We have staff who qualify as state certified sexual assault crisis counselors, and we also have staff that qualify as human trafficking caseworkers. And in both of those cases, what that means is if a victim of either of those crimes works with those staff, then their communication is privileged per the law. And so we stick to those guidelines. We make sure that law enforcement and our DA partners know that those are our guidelines, so there's no confusion about it in the future. We let our clients know that those are our guidelines. But we do certainly have moments where there are cases or situations where that issue can be pressed. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, there's the Brady rule,
Mm-hmm.
and so as a nonprofit, we are not a part of the prosecution team. So we're a nonprofit providing victim services, and we do refer back and forth, and we do communicate case status updates, but we're not a part of the team. We're not obtaining information, on behalf of the crime. We're always referring back to the investigator if something comes up in our communication with a client or a victim. If they, have something more to say or something more to add, then we coordinate communication with the investigator and let the victim and the investigator have those discussions. So there certainly have been times where we have been pressed. Our office, it's not uncommon to receive a subpoena for files. It's not super common, but it's not uncommon. And we
Mm-hmm.
respond regularly with the legal codes identifying the victim's privilege, and we assert the victim's rights in all of those cases. So I'm going to knock on wood right now. So far, we have been
Mm-hmm.
really incredibly successful because everyone has really been really focused on victims' rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wins if the victim's rights have been impeded upon. The criminal justice system doesn't win. Everyone's rights needs to be adhered to. The defendant's
Sure.
right, the victim's right. So everyone works really hard, and it is tricky. But it's again maybe one of those benefits of having a nonprofit partner is that we can work with a client in a way that works to make them comfortable, help to create a safe space for them, knowing, we're not turning around and sharing this information with really anybody. We're just solely here for the victims, for what they need, what they want, how they want us to advocate for them. That's our primary purpose and goal, and we stick to that. And luckily for all of us in the Orange County community, all of the partners in the criminal justice system really respect and honor that and do everything that we can to make sure everyone's rights are adhered to.
And just for our audience to be clear, when you mentioned the Brady rule, is it fair to say that that rule requires government-based victim advocates to turn over any evidence that's helpful to the defendant? Would that be a fair way to summarize that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way. I think to be more clear, most of the county-based, quote-unquote, advocates actually work for the DA's office. So they're hired by their county DA's office. They're paid by the county DA's office. And so if you work for the DA's office, you are, a part of the prosecuting team. And so they would need to share that information with the DAs so that that information is available to the defense if needed. And as a nonprofit, since we don't work for them, we don't fall under that rule. And now I think it's important to understand, a lot of advocates' work, both the government-based and the community-based, really has very little to do with information about the crime. Advocates are not, asking questions about what happened and, why, where, and how. We're not exploring those things. So I think in either case, community or government-based, the advocates really aren't receiving information that, would impact the investigation of the case or the prosecution of the case. There's really a narrow focus on, how do we emotionally support you? How do we, make sure you have what you need to understand what's happening at the court? And so with that narrow focus, both community and government-based advocates really can avoid falling into accidentally hearing information that perhaps needs to be that may be discoverable. But in the end, that's pretty accurate. If you work for a government-based agency, it's likely that you're actually a part of the DA's office, and therefore the information that the victims share does get shared with the DA's office. Matter of fact, I think that just reminds me, we do keep client files, I guess for lack of a better word, but the files are really more about what is the case status update and when did we speak to them? We don't even collect detailed information about the contents of communication or anything in detail. And again, that's for all of our victims because we want to adhere to Marsy's Law and respect that our victims have the right to privacy. And there's just no reason to, we're not therapists, we're not clinicians. We don't need to, track someone's, their statements and how they're presenting. We just need to know, have we let them know about their victims' rights? Which victims' rights do they want to know? We keep track of that. And other than that, it's just advocacy services. And so it's another way that we're able to help, make sure that the victim's privacy is maintained.
Lita, thank you so much for taking your time and coming on the podcast and spending some time with us today.
It's been my great pleasure. Again, thank you so much for including Waymakers in this conversation, Nima. We really appreciate it.
Now that you've heard the show, please take a moment to rate and review it. And if you have any questions about any of the information you heard today, you can reach the Victims of Crime Resource Center at 1-800-842-8467. Or you can reach us online at 1-800-VICTIMS.org or Facebook at Victims of Crime Resource Center or Twitter at 1-800-VICTIMS. If you haven't had a chance, please take a look at some of the other episodes in our series. Thanks for listening.